Hey, Curt Hennig fans. Hello and welcome. I have a special guest today. We're going to do a special bonus content. I have Graspfire here, over here. Um, so for the next couple hours, we're going to talk about wrestling. We can talk about Curt Hennig. We can talk about pretty much anything. But I'm going to give him the floor here as we are going to start. Just introduce yourself. And we're going to go into the first topic, which is how did you get into wrestling? So you have the floor.
Hello, my name is Matthew Collins. I'm born and raised in Southern California, and I've been watching wrestling since I was probably 5 years old. Started with WWF. Of course, I'm 41, so Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior were big ones for me growing up. And then Mr. Perfect and the Heart Foundation, Legion of Doom, the Natural Disasters, Undertaker, Macho Man, all those guys. And then I probably stopped watching after the Montreal Screwjob and the NWO. That pretty much was my time out of it.
Okay. Anything after that, or is it kind of just, was it pretty
I
much
did
done?
watch, I think it was FMW Japanese wrestling with Mick Foley for a while.
Okay.
That was a little
All right.
after the NWO, I think.
Yep. Yeah. I didn't kind of like what they did with the NWO, because at one point it was like, oh, it's NWO Hollywood and NWO Wolfpack. I'm like, wait, they split it up? What's going on? Why did they split it up?
Too much to pay attention to.
Well, and I think that they wanted the Wolfpack to go babyface. So they wanted all those guys. I mean, because if you think about it, Sting, Luger, DDP were kind of all baby faces at that time. And I think that they just kind of wanted to turn all those guys babyface. So it was Savage. It was first Savage and Nash, and then they brought Conan into it. Then they brought Curt into it. But I think Curt was kind of like that mole. Like he was kind of being a mole playing both sides. I think they wanted that kind of thing. I'm not really sure. I saw an interview with Eric Bischoff, and he said, well, there really wasn't a plan for Curt. And that's kind of why he defected back to the NWO Hollywood. And then, of course, they brought Luger and Sting into it. And then eventually they were trying to get DDP, but I think Hogan went and just smashed him with a chair. And it was kind of like no one ever talked about DDP joining. So, which is kind of archaic and dumb in my opinion, but that's how things go in the world of wrestling. It's like, you're not really sure, what's going on, and there's all this stuff happening in the background. So, I too fell in love with the NWO. It's just when they started messing with it, because they split it up, then they got it back together. Everyone remembers the, finger poke of doom is what they called it. Just really strange how they kind of went along. And then, Curt was part of the NWO, and then they kind of beat him up at an airport, or they were just about to get on a private jet or something, and they beat him up. So they kicked him out. And then, of course, a couple months later comes the West Texas Rednecks, and you're like, wait, wasn't he just in the NWO? Now you kicked him out or whatever. There's a lot to say about the NWO, mostly because in '96 I lived vicariously through them. But so tell me a little bit about what you saw in the NWO, why you like the NWO, and kind of where you see, like, do you agree that it was kind of stupid at the end, or do you think that was necessary?
I'm not even sure if I saw it all the way to the end, to be honest. But I stopped watching WWF, and my friend at school kept saying, "Oh, you gotta come watch the NWO." So eventually, I broke down and I saw how many old WWF or WWE, I guess, wrestlers were on the roster, and I was drawn in for a little while. But yeah, it seemed like Bret Hart and Mr. Perfect they weren't sure what to do with him,
Right. When they first came into it, they had this whole angle with Curt, and I thought it was kind of stupid at first. You know, I'm thinking, and I said this during one of my podcast things, that my belief is that I think they should have had Curt join the Four Horsemen, even though I know Curt didn't want to. He actually came out and said this in an interview. He actually didn't really want to. And it's because there was some bad blood there between him and Ric Flair. Yeah, so if anyone doesn't know the story, Curt actually admitted that it was Vince that came to him and said that, guess what? Ric Flair doesn't think you're in his league. So Curt was going to come back early. And then Vince came to him one day and said, Flair doesn't think you're in his league, so he's not going to give you the belt. Because I think they were going to kind of have a feud when Curt came back. I don't know if they were going to turn Curt babyface or maybe Flair babyface and have like a heel kind of thing. But yeah, and of course, Curt was upset. Anyone would be upset, really. I mean, at that point, because he had the same thing that Brett had. I mean, Brett said that Hogan came and said, "Oh, well, Brett's not in my league." He did the same thing with Curt. That's why they stopped pushing him in '89. So, for those who don't know the story, yes, Hogan and Flair did it to Curt and said, "Oh, he's not in our league, and we're not going to give him the belt." So when Flair was just about to leave anyway, they kind of, well, and the whole thing with the human growth hormones that the Warrior and Davey Boy Smith had gotten popped for is why he came back as a babyface at before some or Survivor Series 1992. And of course, then you have, I mean, we did the babyface turn on my program. We watched along to it and kind of put ourselves in it like we were actually a part of it. So like it's almost like we were actually in there with Curt and we were feeling what he was feeling, which is kind of cool because you can actually make these storylines like almost believable and put yourself into that story, and you could kind of make your own comments. You know, of course in 92 there's things you couldn't say, you know, that they would be racially charged, or what they would say racially charged today, especially with Razor Ramon, who was playing a Cuban American at the time. So there's a lot of stuff I probably said, and I'm sort of glad that I didn't promote it because it probably wouldn't have got promoted. But anyway, to get back to what we were talking about. So I think that at the beginning, when Curt came in at the end of June, I think he definitely should have just joined the Four Horsemen, gotten them to trust him, gotten the fans to trust him that he was the enforcer or whatever you want to call him. And then, you know, when he turned on them at Fall Brawl, it would be like, oh, that mean person. He literally he screwed us. We thought he was a Four Horseman, and here he's not a Four Horseman. He turned on us, and I think that would have been a better storyline. Or you have him like not join the Four Horsemen at all, even when Arn Anderson gave him his spot. I just don't think that. I mean, you either poop or get off the pot. So you do either or, but you don't do. It didn't make any sense. So, okay. So, and if you watch that with Arn Anderson, the whole spot thing, it didn't make any sense. Curt's facial features was not matching what his response to Arn Anderson was. So watch Curt's face as Arn Anderson is talking. It's like, really? You want me to do this? I'm not going to do this. But then it doesn't match the response when he says it would be a privilege to join the Four Horsemen and be a part of the Four Horsemen. Now, I get that, you know, that's what he was supposed to do. That was all Eric Bischoff, you know, behind the scene. And they wanted that kind of like a spy kind of thing. Like, oh, yeah, I'll join you. But, you know, really, I was talking to Eric Bischoff and stuff. And actually, Flair brought that up. So that's how I would see it go. Like, and then, you know, you do the thing at
I'm not sure if I dropped internet or if you did.
You're back in here. Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, cool. I just was saying I didn't know if I dropped out or if you did.
No, it did something weird. I don't know what it's doing. But anyway, so getting back to that, you either have him join at the beginning, and the storyline makes sense now that he's been with them for 3 months, however long he was there, from the end of June to September, about 3 months, 3.5 months. The whole thing with DDP didn't make any sense because they kind of blamed Curt for that. He was DDP's partner at Bash at the Beach, but Dallas pulled the rope down and Curt tumbled out of the ring. And then Curt's like, I could have hurt myself, and everyone blamed Curt for that, not DDP. So it didn't make any sense. Like, that's kind of like a heel thing to do, pull the rope down and the guy falls out. So I'm not really sure what exactly happened there. All I do know is that it just didn't make any sense. You do this or you do that, but you don't. Whatever they did do, it didn't make any sense. It didn't make sense to me. Why you would have to train like 2 weeks before Fall Brawl and then just have them turn on you anyway.
Do you think they were just trying to get as many WWF guys as they could without having any storyline for them? They just wanted them all, gathering them.
Good
it seemed that way to
question.
me, sort of.
Yeah, and
But
it
I don't
could
know
have
that
been
much.
that. Well, no, and even if there's like you don't know a lot of behind the scenes, but you just kind of watched as a fan. The thing I like to do is I like to watch a lot of YouTube videos. So I like to, all the behind the scenes stuff. And like I said, I've had my emails answered by certain wrestlers. So Shane Douglas, Jim Cornette, they just did the one with Conan and Disco Inferno. And I would love to talk to Jim Cornette more about, the Montreal screw job and ask him more about Curt, but it just kind of seemed like Jim, didn't spend a lot of time with Curt, didn't really get to know Curt. But and I would love to ask Kevin Nash about, Curt and any funny rib stories that he had, because that seems to be kind of the theme I've been doing is, what's your Curt Hennig, rib or whatever, because he was a big ribber. But and not knowing the behind the scenes, you wouldn't see, oh, well, that doesn't make any sense. That's kind of stupid, or I don't know why that's happening. So I think what I think they were probably trying to do, where they were just trying to throw money at the talent, kind of like Vince had done when he got those talent from the territories. And I think that a lot of that had to do with, Bischoff had the same sort of idea. Hey, let's get all this WWE talent and put WWE out of business. And then, we'll be the number one honchos, but it didn't quite work out that way. It was a brilliant move if you were going to pull all those guys from the territories. Unfortunately, Vince already did it. But the thing is, once you pull all those guys from the talent, and even Bret Hart, you could at least, I mean, now you have them, now you don't know what to do with them, was the first thing. Second of all, there was other talent in WWF that stepped up. They stepped up to the plate. Stone Cold, Triple H, Undertaker was still there. You had Shawn Michaels, who was leaving, but still kind of in the business and still had things to do with it. So even if you didn't have Bret Hart, Curt Hennig, Hogan, Nash, Hall, you still had Triple H, which was up and coming. You still had Stone Cold, who would become one of the biggest superstars to ever be in the business. You had The Rock, who was third generation, and it really wasn't much for The Rock, but you have to admit that he at least did take the business to where it needed to go. And of course, you had all those guys who Triple H was managed by Curt right before Curt left. So Stone Cold actually has a Curt Hennig story where he actually introduced him to Kevin Dunn, and I wonder sometimes if that hadn't have happened, if actually we would have Stone Cold today, or would we be talking about the one of the greatest superstars to ever be in the business if it wasn't for Curt Hennig introducing him to Kevin Dunn, because he sort of was, oh well, I'm the $1 million champion, I'm the ringmaster, but then it kind of was, Steve saying, well, I don't want to be that, I want to be Stone Cold, I want to be somebody else, because it kind of was fizzling out. And then of course everyone remembers what happened with the Click, and Triple H was supposed to win the King of the Ring 96. He didn't, because that was backlash for what happened in the Garden. So I think that when it comes right down to it, and then of course you have Bret Hart also helped with Austin and bringing him up to that league of, one of the greatest superstars to ever be. So, I mean, I have to give Bret Hart the credit too. I can't just, I can't just sit here and say that, Bret, he gets some of that credit too. I'm sure a lot of those guys were always, finding new ways to make their characters better, bigger and better. But it's just when you're still up and coming, and all these veterans are now moving on to something bigger and brighter, or what they say was bigger for them. If you ask Curt,
paycheck wise, at least.
right. So if you ask Curt, his little thing was, when they asked him, they said, why did you go? Were you kind of like Bret in this, did you come back to Vince and say, oh, by the way, Vince, I want you to match this? He said, well, I had a meeting, and this is true, Eric Bischoff confirmed this, that he had a meeting with his dad. Larry the Axe was with him, and the contract that Eric Bischoff was offering Curt it blew anything that Vince could have done right out of the water. So in many sense, yes, it was just like WCW and Eric Bischoff were trying to do almost the same thing that Vince did with the territories, put them out of business. The thing is that when you have other talent that Curt was, when like when Hogan left in 84, for example, Curt and the Midnight Rockers, so Shawn Michaels, Mario Jannetty, Curt, and of course other ones behind him, were all stepping up to the plate to try to make AWA still a household name in the territories. Unfortunately, Curt would eventually go along with the Midnight Rockers, along with Ken Patera was there at one time. I mean, there's a lot of names that just eventually would all go to Vince anyway, so the territory couldn't survive. Crush, who is Bryan Adams, will eventually go with he'll join Demolition, and be the third guy for Demolition. So it'll be Axe, Smash, and Crush. And of course, Axe had health problems, so he had to kind of leave anyway, and then Bryan Adams took over. So, and again, that's what WCW had done in later 98 when they started getting more guys, because Bryan Adams came into it, or Crush. He was known as Crush. Obviously, he couldn't take the gimmick with him because, but it happened the same way. And I think that Curt just was trying to do what was best for him, what was best for his legacy. And if you listen to that interview that I've heard, with him, he said, it probably wasn't the best thing. I think it was, it extended his career. It made him a household name. Everyone knows who the West Texas Rednecks were. They know who the NWO was. And the fact that he was a part of all that, I think made him a bigger star than even his son, unfortunately. Or maybe his dad too. I know Larry was known more by the territories. He wasn't really known by WWF, WCW, or WWE. But at the very least, you had that where he could at least make his name bigger, and everyone should know who Curt Hennig is if you are an avid wrestling fan. So, so I think that in the grand scheme of things, a lot of those guys just saw that the Eric Bischoff thing and were completely blown away. I mean, even Brett admits this in Hitman Wrestling with Shadows, and also with his book, that he had gone to, Vince after talking to Eric Bischoff and said, Vince, can you counter this? And he said, no, Brett, I can't counter that. So I guess you're going to WCW. I was just talking to my guy about this because my guy is also an avid wrestling guy. And I think we've come to the conclusion that we think that we believe that Vince still harbored feelings for what happened with Hogan. Because remember, Hogan in 93 would become champion at WrestleMania 9. However, that was very short-lived. But it was so that Hogan would not go to WCW. And of course, what happened at King of the Ring, he drops the belt to Yokozuna and he goes to WCW anyway. So by 90, I'm sure 93, 94, he's actually now a part of WCW, which is what Vince didn't want him to do. So when Vince sort of heard that Brett was leaving, I think he kind of got that in his head. Well, if we can't make this work or we can't make that work, at the very least, we can. How do I put this? At the very least, he would have something. It wasn't very good. The Montreal Screwjob was not good. It exposed the business. It wasn't good for Brett. Wasn't good for Sean. It left a stain. And, Jim Cornette has admitted this several times, many times. He's said, that it was Vince who wanted to become a baby face after that whole Montreal screw job. And I'm like, how did Vince even come to that conclusion? Because it wasn't a baby face thing to do is screw your wrestlers. But what came out of it was Mr. McMahon, the billionaire promoter, is going to mess with his employees. So then that's where Stone Cold came out and became one of the biggest superstars. I think it had a lot to do with the whole Brett thing. So, but yeah, apparently Vince in his ultimate wisdom thought he was going to be a babyface and that didn't happen. So I think that there's a lot of things to realize after this Montreal screw job. Now I know you're a big Bret Hart fan. I didn't mind Bret. I mean, he hung around with Curt. He hung around with all those guys. So, of course, I always talk about the Rick Rude thing where Rick Rude said to Eric Bischoff, I'm coming back. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a question. It was, I'm coming back. And Rick really stuck it to Vince because, as we all know now, Raw was taped. It wasn't live. Where WCW was live. The Nitro was live. And I actually like that episode when he comes back because Hogan doesn't come out with the NWO. He actually comes out and, they come out, they're talking amongst themselves. And then all of a sudden you see Hogan and he's pointing to the, thing and it's Rick Rude. Rick Rude comes back. So I think that was, it was a good Nitro. It was a very awesome Nitro to have. I think that because they all hung out together, him, Curt, Brett, Davey Boy, Jim, Neidhart, and then also Beefcake at one point, that was before the parasailing accident. They all hung out together. So to say that, when you do one thing to, and I'm sure Rick and Brett were not like close, but they, they hung out and they were friends. So if you did something to his friend, Rick Rude was mad. He was pissed. So, and rightfully so. I mean, what Vince did was expose the business.
Dropped internet again. Yeah, crazy wrestling chaos going on, even here right now. But I agree. I can't imagine Vince being a babyface. No, that's fine.
So I just think that it's, I mean, it is what it is. So if I just wish it hadn't have happened that way. But so tell me, what sort of made uh like Bret Hart, or the did you like Davey Boy? Did you like Jim Neidhart? What kind of drew you in that made you become a fan of theirs?
Starting with it was the Rockers and the Hart Foundation were my two favorite tag teams as a kid.
Okay.
So yeah, that's what did it. And just the technical way he wrestles. Brett reminds me a lot of Curt, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Or they remind me of each other. I was just watching their match in '89, and it was a good match. Not as good as their one in '93, but yeah, it shows just
okay.
how they
That
kind of mirrored each
babyface
other.
versus babyface match was unique. I will say that it was unique, but it was different because you remember Curt had just, I mean, at 90 before Survivor Series had just turned babyface, and he had been heel all this time. So give me 1 second. I'm just okay. So so yeah, Curt and Brett were both second generation. Of course, you have Stu Hart, and then you have Larry the Axe is Curt's father. You have two great technical wrestlers, scientific wrestlers is what they called them, or what Larry Zbyszko would call them. So you have two guys that knew how to wrestle. Now, and I was asked this question because we just did SummerSlam 1991.
Ooh.
So if you've seen their match from SummerSlam 1991 and know anything about that match, it's a hard match if you know what happens. So if you, for example, if you know that Curt had messed up his back before that, then that's kind of every time he goes around, I'm just like, ugh, oh
Yeah,
boy,
I know.
Watch the back, please. So I think that's, and yes, that episode will be dropping in like mid-March. It's like episode 27, I think, but we're only on 21 currently. So so unfortunately we do have a little bit to wait yet for that to drop, but yeah, I'm like, oh, watch the back, please. Watch the back.
Same with Andre the Giant and Hulk when he slammed him. Oh,
right.
But it was such a big moment, you know. Had to do it.
Well, and I saw on X that Hogan is trying to lie about it, or has said lies about it. The thing is with Andre, if you told him to do a job, he would do a job for you. There was no, oh, Andre could have kicked out and ruined the finish. If Andre was told to do a finish a certain way, that's how he would do it. There is no, oh, well, he'll just kick out and he'll do his own finish. First of all, that's not how Andre was going. That's not how Andre is. That's not what he was all about. So I don't know where Hogan got that line in the first place, other than he just made it up. Okay. That's the first thing. The second thing is why Hogan would make that up in the first place. I have no idea. I don't know Terry personally. I just know that he's made stories up about other wrestlers like Harley Race. He's made up things about, he did an album for the WWF, and it was he helped a producer or whatever, Simon Cowell. He knew him personally, and he worked on the WWE thing together with him. I was just like, well, first of all, I think if Simon Cowell, you had something to do with that, I think it would have been, mainstreamed at the time, but it's not mainstreamed anymore. So I wasn't really sure what exactly he was talking about, other than the fact that he just kind of made everything up. So, and I like Terry. I liked him in the NWO. I thought he was really good in the NWO. I think he pretty much did the same thing he did in WWE to a lot of the wrestlers. So Brett, he did it to Brett again. And eventually they would just make Brett champion anyway. But as long as like Hogan had the belt, it just seemed like there was no, there was nothing happening there. And a lot of guys had problems with Hogan giving up the belt. I know he wanted to give it to Sting, but there were some controversial things that should have happened that didn't. Eric Bischoff talks about that at Super Brawl, I think it was, there was supposed to be a fast count and the count was normal. Okay, so they were supposed to screw, I don't know if it was Hogan. I'm not sure who they were trying to work over there, but Sting was supposed to get the belt, and technically he did, but there was supposed to be a fast count, and the referee screwed it up. So Nick Patrick was supposed to count real fast, and he didn't. So that was a botch. And they kind of had to come up with something else, and they took the belt off of Sting, and it was kind of weird how they gave it back to Hogan. I mean, Sting did have it. He did have it. He had that little celebration at the end there. And then it just kind of seemed like everybody kind of fell toward the wayside until Bill Goldberg came around. And that whole streak and, if you can beat Scott Hall, you can beat Hogan. And then that whole thing with Hogan started. And I'm just like, what is this? I'm not sure what exactly all this is, because this doesn't make any sense. First of all, they pushed a person who could not wrestle, which is very similar to what they did with Warrior. Warrior was more of a bodybuilder. Goldberg was a football player who didn't really know how to wrestle. And if you talk to Jim Cornette, the power plant was pretty much useless. They would teach you how to take a few bumps, but they wouldn't really teach you like wrestling moves. So they had Goldberg and they pushed him, and he was hurting guys. He hurt Bret Hart, of course. Everyone knows that he kicked him in the head. And I think Bret was already pretty much suffering from, he probably already had a concussion at the time during that match, but they didn't stop the match. They didn't do anything. They just let Goldberg kick him in the head. And well, unfortunately that was the end of Bret. So, talk a little bit about your, you said you liked the Rockers. Okay, so just talk about the Rockers. You said you liked the Rockers when they came in. Just talk a little bit about, was it just the fact that you liked their wrestling, or did you like one particular, Marty Jannetty or Shawn Michaels?
I was a Marty Jannetty fan. My brother was a Shawn Michaels fan. So
okay, so did you what captured you about the Rockers?
Probably how fast they were and the high flying moves they did and stuff.
Okay. Yeah,
and
that
the whole Shawn Michaels drama. Always drama with Shawn Michaels.
Yeah, it seems like it seems like Shawn Michaels is always having drama. Now, did you like the whole barber when they did the barber chair or barber show or something with Beefcake? It was Shawn Michaels turning on Marty Jannetty, kicking him through the window. What did you think about that? Was it something like that, a kind of a letdown for you, because they were breaking up the Rockers now and Shawn was kind of going his own way?
Oh yeah, I was bummed when Marty, I couldn't see him as a singles wrestler, and he didn't really do that much to make a name for himself as a singles wrestler.
Yeah, and everyone points to the drugs and alcohol, of course, that are going to be thematic with wrestling. So and that goes into a lot of
Nope. Yeah, I remember watching a hard copy episode, and a guy broke his neck that was wrestling with Marty Jannetty. That's controversial, though. I'm not sure if that's true. I'd like to ask her about that when she gets back. But they're.
I'm so sorry. I don't know what is going on today. This has never done this. I've done several shows and it's never done this.
Well, do you know if it's true or not? I remember watching a hard copy episode, and a guy broke his neck when they were doing the finishing move on him, and it was Marty Jannetty, I think. Is that true, or do you know anything about that?
I have not so been informed. I've never heard of Marty hurting somebody. Yeah. Very interesting that would actually come about, because I have not been so informed that I do know that Marty was making up a story about him and a gentleman that he supposedly deleted. Have you heard this story?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, so it was on an episode of Jim Cornette. Apparently, Marty was talking about an experience he had when he was 13 years old, where he was buying some things that he shouldn't have been buying at 13. Remember, we have to kind of watch what we say on YouTube. So he was buying things he shouldn't have on, he shouldn't have. And there's a gentleman who he was buying it from, and I'm not sure what happened exactly, but he said that the gentleman tried to come on to him a little too strongly and was trying to, do things to him in a, a gentleman was trying to grab a hold of him. Like I said, I have to watch what I say for YouTube purposes, but Marty said he hit him with a rock and the man passed. Now, no one, they've done an investigation and no one was able to corroborate this story. So we're not really sure what exactly he was talking about or what he was alluding to. Yeah, I don't know.
Wow.
I really did. And when I heard the story, I'm just like, wait, what? Why would you even tell that story? He told it on X, apparently, or he told it on some kind of social media. So I'm not exactly sure what exactly he was talking about in that instance. It's just so, it's very weird that he would even bring that up. So, yeah, I don't know. It was a weird story that he had told over. I don't know if someone was trolling him, so he might have been like trying to impress him, be impressive in front of a troll or whatever. So there's lots of reasons why people will just make up stories, but that was kind of weird. Yeah. And I do have an update on him. He needs his leg amputated. Yeah, something with his ankle. When they did a Dark Side of the Ring episode on him, and they were talking about this on Jim Cornette's show, that there was, his ankle didn't look good, even when they came out with that episode. And unfortunately, he's going to need, they just came out with this the other day, he's going to need his ankle or his leg amputated to save his life. I can't say enough good things about Marty Jannetty. I mean, I've never seen anything bad other than that. I didn't want to even look at his Dark Side of the Ring, because I have an image of Marty Jannetty in my head and I didn't want to ruin it. Yeah. I know there's bad things that they always come out and say, well, Marty did this and Marty did that, or he was a big partier, or he was a big ribber. Yeah, okay. But I mean, I don't want to ruin the image that I have. It's kind of like, I didn't want to watch the Iron Claw because I didn't want my image of Carrie Von Erich to, leave. So, because I really liked Carrie. Him and Curt's match at SummerSlam 1990 was the reason why I became a Curt Hennig fan, but also a big wrestling fan.
Yeah, I could see that. The family was great.
Yeah. So, and I just thought the Iron Claw would ruin it for me. So I was just like, you know what? This isn't worth it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, but we did a special tribute to the Iron Claw, and we watched along on my show, the match with Carrie and Curt, and we did all the promos and everything that went with it. So it was very much, it was spectacular, at least I thought. Because I also put in some bonus stuff of their face to face, which I had just found on YouTube not too long before I did that watch along, and then I also put in like Kurt's comments about 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 Carrie. So it's episode 18. Yeah, I think it's 18. But if you're ever interested in listening to it, it's an awesome match. And like I said, I end with, because at first I had forgotten to put in Kurt's comments about Carrie, so I'm like, oh, I gotta go back and do it. I'm like, I gotta edit. And then or it was the face to face. I forgot to put the face to face in. But I love that face to face because it's just kind of like Sean Mooney. Like you see Curt take down his strap and he has another singlet on underneath. So it's not like he was going to, get naked or anything. But he takes down his strap and Sean Mooney's like, Mr. Perfect, this is a family show. And I'm just like, Sean, be quiet. He's not going to get naked. Like, I wish he would. No. Hey, I'm a healthy female. I'm allowed to say that.
Right.
So, I just think there's a lot of things that just for my perspective, when I started getting into the behind the scenes, especially with Kurt's ribs and stuff, there's a lot of stuff that I was like, oh, I gotta see this, I gotta see that. But there's some things I'm just like, I wish I didn't have to hear about that, especially with the Billy Jack stuff that just came out and the Vince McMahon stuff that just came out. I'm just like shaking my head going, why do we have to hear about this right now? We have all this other stuff going on in the world and we got to hear about this stuff, which leaves a stain on wrestling as a whole, I think. So, but I'll give you the floor. You take it where you want. What are your thoughts on the recent Vince McMahon, Billy Jack situation?
Oh, honestly, I haven't paid that much attention. I heard Bret Hart's comments just written. And I mean, you always knew that crazy things were going on because how many wrestlers died. I mean, good grief. Tragically way too young. So, yeah, you knew there had to be something going on. But yeah, I haven't paid too much attention to the Vince McMahon stuff besides knowing that he had to step down and is getting in some kind of trouble. But
yeah, and the thing is that there's allegations allegedly, of certain things were done to this lady who is coming out with the allegations. And we're not going to go into too much detail, but I read the messages and stuff, and it just doesn't seem like that happened. It seemed like she was more like a willing participant. But some of that stuff, I was just like, I'm reading, I'm like, oh God, I'm going to skip over this because I just didn't want to read it. It was just nasty stuff. And I'm just like, I'm not going to, no. I don't want that image in my head or I will puke. I literally was like, reading even some of what I read, I was just like, oh boy, this is not right. So I'm not saying that he didn't do it. I'm just saying that I feel she was more the willing participant. And I'm sure people would get upset with me for saying that. But again, guys, you can't just say me too, hashtag me too, every time someone comes out with allegations, especially when it's a he said, she said, no one was there. I wasn't there. None of them were there. So you don't really know what happened, until, whatever comes out in court documents. Let the courts decide this. That's what they're there for. I mean, she was okay with the $1 million that she got. So, she was scheduled to get $3 million. And because he didn't give her the $3 million, he gave her $1 million. Now all of a sudden she's coming out with all these allegations. And I'm just like, Nope. Sorry, I smell a rat.
I like
um,
Vince McMahon most when he was a wrestler, the commentator. It seemed like
right.
it took turns with Macho Man and Mr. Perfect there. I don't know if they had injuries at that time or why they were commentating.
Yeah. So Mr. Perfect had hurt his back again
Mm,
at the end of '93. He
yeah.
also was having personal problems at home, and he doesn't really elaborate. He just says personal problems, and he also had hurt his back. Now he does come back briefly.
Oh, yeah, they were great commentators, Macho Man and Mr. Perfect. That's what was so cool. They were larger than life wrestlers and as commentary. So it was almost like I didn't mind him at ringside because you never know, he could jump in the action or just be the announcer.
Yeah, sorry about that. I've never had this happen before. I apologize. I really don't know
Oh,
what's going on here.
oh,
Um,
Gremlin.
yeah, yeah. You had some really good shows, and now we're just going to mess it up. So not a lot of people know that about him, and he did come back briefly in '94. Um, he was referee for the Yokozuna Lex Luger match, and of
Right.
course, everyone knows that he did not give Luger the chance to get the belt. So um, I'm not sure. I mean, he disqualified Luger, so that made him give up that chance to be and then one of my favorites is he comes out on the Heartbreak Show, or what was that Shawn Michaels show? Was it the Heartbreak Show?
Maybe.
Okay.
I can't
I'm
remember.
not sure exactly what it was called, but it was a Shawn Michaels show, kind of like the Barbara or the Piper's Pit and
Mhm.
Pit or something. Eventually, Jake would have that. So I'm not exactly sure what exactly was going on there. But he did come back briefly. They turned him heel again, and then he kind of disappeared again. Again, having personal problems at home. And then they brought him back as a commentator in '95 because I'm guessing he probably was still kind of hurt and couldn't really wrestle. Now, a lot of people speculate that Curt was going to come back in '96. That unfortunately did not happen. That would have been around the time that it was just before he left. He, like I said, had managed Triple H. However, and he was dressed to wrestle, but that didn't happen. So he was with Sable and Mark Marrow at one point, but then unfortunately, it just worked out that he was going to manage Triple H, and he did right before he left. And that was because he had that meeting with Eric Bischoff.
Mm.
And Eric Bischoff turned him or had talked him into, coming to WCW. But a lot of people say he was making another run in WWE. Um, well, if he had already talked to Eric Bischoff, then that was not going to happen. They may have talked about it, but it wasn't going to happen once the whole deal with Eric Bischoff happened. So I think there's a lot of things that go into that. Um, whether that was, um, you know, whatever that was supposed to be is what it was. Um, but and I hate to cut this short, but like we're having all kinds of technical difficulties. So
Yeah.
I'll let you have the final word. Um, why don't you make the announcement about our new show, and then I'll just kind of fill in the blanks.
Cool. Yeah. So what is that? March 4th?
March 4th. Yep.
Monday, March 4th, we're going to start Black Magic Talk, which is going to be awesome. And I'm going to be co hosting for that. So that should be interesting. I'm looking forward
Yep.
to it.
Yep. So tell everyone, are you pagan or Wiccan?
I would say loosely pagan. I follow
Okay.
mostly Norse stuff.
Okay. All right, so then I'm Wiccan. So and that's what I was like dropping on the kids show when I was on kids show yesterday. I was kind of like, well, I think he's pagan, but I'm not sure. But we kind of had the same, taste in Norse. Of course, I know about a lot about the Norse gods, and of course, I follow Hecate, or pray to Hecate. She's been a major help in my life, so I can't say enough good things about her. Um, and it's just it's going to be so much wonderful. It's going to be so wonderful to talk about. I mean, I talk about wrestling, and I love wrestling, and I know you love wrestling. But it'll be a nice pace to talk about, something that we both believe in, and it's something that I've always wanted to do. You've also said you've also wanted to do it.
Absolutely.
And I believe that Hecate has, told me in a dream that I was going to be talking about it. So it's going to be new and exciting, and I can't wait.
Cool.
But get to let's just do a little bit more about the wrestling here. Is there any final words on like where do you see modern wrestling coming back? I mean, Kit Cabello seems to think that they're going to make their way back around, and maybe we would have another Attitude Era. Do you think that could happen?
I hope so. I would love to see that. Wrestling was such a huge part of my childhood, from the crazy promos that they would have to backstage brawls and, Royal Rumble. Yeah, I mean, the different events that WCW and WWF had used to mean something, you're always looking forward to it as a kid. And I don't know, it'll take a little bit to pull me back in, but I would love that if that did happen.
Yeah, see, I think so too. Like, I was watching the Elimination Chamber because, like I said, for my other show, I Pro Wrestling Talk, and I was just like, skip. Who are these people? I have no idea. I don't know who Drew McIntyre is. I just know he's a Scottish wrestler who was champion at one point. Whoopee. Yeah. The only reason I knew anybody was they had Randy Orton there. They had Randy Orton and Bobby Lashley. Well, just about before I stopped watching is when Bobby Lashley and, of course, Randy Orton were in it, but they were mostly green at that point. Now, Randy Orton, everyone knows, is third generation. Yes. And he probably makes it worthwhile, I'm sure. But from what I've seen, I was just like, you know what? Skip. Okay, good. Drew won. Whoopee. I didn't even watch the women's one because I was just like, you know what? I probably could wrestle better than all those chicks combined. So I was just like, skip. But I mean, it's been a pleasure. I am so sorry for our technical difficulties. I don't know. I mean, this has never happened to me before, so I don't. All I know is it's just like, oh, reload. I was like, oh no, what do you mean reload? What are you doing? But I've had so much fun talking with you, and like I said, we have new and exciting things coming up, guys. March 4th, we will be recording our first episode, and hopefully we won't have technical difficulties. But we'll be recording our Black Magic Talk. It's going to be really exciting, especially for all the Wiccans and pagans out there who are a little afraid to talk, but they are willing to come on our show and talk and be a part of it. So I hope you guys will join us. It will drop after March 4th. So probably like Monday, I'll do it at work or something like real fast while I'm working on computers, because that's what I do for a living. As everyone knows on my show, everyone knows I'm a computer geek. So, so I tear computers apart for a living at my other job, other than talk about wrestling and talk about pagan and Wiccan stuff. So this is it for us, guys, because like I said, we are having some technical difficulties that just I can't just do for 2 hours, unfortunately. But it has been a pleasure, Graspfire. Your name is Matt, so we can just call you Matt. Okay, yep. We'll call you Matt. And I, of course, am just Steph. I'm a woman, Steph, not the guy, Steph Curry or something. Which I was just talking to about my guy. I'm like, why would they call a guy Steph? That doesn't make any sense. Right. Unless they're confusing, whatever. But it's been a real pleasure. And remember, everybody, nobody beats Mr. Perfect. Nobody.